Rumpelstiltskin is one of the most intriguing characters in lore, in part because he fits an ancient pattern of human interactions with magical beings. In her book on cunning folk and familiar spirits, Emma Wilby states that the basic dynamics of the relationship between the cunning woman or the witch and her spirit ally is easily recognizable to all of us, being encapsulated in narrative themes running through traditional folktales and myths from throughout the world. Classics such as Rumpelstiltskin, Puss in Boots, The Frog Princess, and so on are representative. In these tales, the protagonist usually finds themselves alone and in some kind of trouble when a supernatural being appears suddenly before them and offers to help them in some way. These fairy stories and myths originate from the same reservoir of folk belief as the descriptions of familiar encounters given by the cunning folk and witches. There is one key difference between these stories and their encounters with familiars, however, which is that Rumpelstiltskin wanted to take the woman's baby. In most stories, like Rumpelstiltskin, the fairy wants to take the woman as their wife, with one exception of a troll, which wants to take the woman's spinning wheel. Most of the time, if a fairy wanted a baby, they would just take it, with only a few exceptions. Of course, fairies did frequently want babies. One of the most common stories of fairies is that of them kidnapping a child and replacing it with one of their own, or with an old fairy pretending to be a child. So why did fairies usually want babies? First, fairies were often sickly and withering away, and human food and care could cure them. There is a story where a fairy queen is dying for want of human food, until a kindly person offers her some. There are many stories which indicate fairy children often needed human milk and care in order to survive. So a fairy might swap a human child for one of their own in order to get the human to take care of the sickly fairy. Second, a human raised in fairyland could grow up to intermarry with the fairies and therefore produce healthier children. Another important factor to keep in mind is that because fairies were frequently physically weak, and because humans had access to weapons such as iron that they didn't, they frequently sought humans to fight in wars for them, or to play sports for them. In medieval stories from Germany, there were fairy beings, likely related to Rumpelstiltskin, which often needed humans to protect them against giants and dragons. However, humans became greedy, as humans will do. It makes sense then for the fairies to want to take human children to raise, so they would be more loyal. Other fairies wanted human servants, for they needed humans to help them bear children, cook food, and perhaps even help some of them clean. Any of these are possible reasons why Rumpelstiltskin would want a child, but he didn't just want any child. He specifically wanted a child who hadn't been born when he made the bargain. He is more prophet than miracle maker, who makes a straightforward bargain, and when he returns to receive the firstborn child, he offers another deal, in the form of a riddle, to see if she has perhaps become smarter than what she was before. Now consider, Merlin was raised by a fairy, as was the wizard who aided Charlemagne. King Arthur was taken by Merlin, who saw his future before he was even born. This might mean that Rumpelstiltskin is after a specific child. He does say that he loves this child more than all the treasures in the world. This particular baby is, after all, the son of a king. Rumpelstiltskin might hope for a better king in the future by removing this child from his parents. We see something similar happen in a French fairy tale in which a fairy is planning to take a child from a royal couple, telling them, "If I left him to you to bring up, you would be certain to make him as foolish as yourselves." In another fairy tale, the fairies take a child away from abusive parents to raise them. So there is evidence that fairies will take a child for the safety and sake of a child or the kingdom. Of course, many fairy tales are a mix of multiple motifs. The story of a strange fairy offering to help with the spinning and the story of a fairy wanting a human baby might have gotten mixed up. That is, these might be motifs from two different stories that actually got smushed together into one final telling. This is a big part of the challenge of trying to interpret fairy tales and their origins. They are made up of motifs and building blocks that are put together by later storytellers.